In this episode, you will listen to Ehuana Yaira Yanomami. She's a leader, an artist, and researcher from the Yanomami Indigenous Peoples in the Brazilian Amazon. Ehuana speaks her mother tongue, one of the 6 languages of the Yanomami language family. We talked to Ehuana along with her translator and friend, Ana Maria Machado, who interpreted her answers in Portuguese. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the depth of the Yanomami language and the gaps that occurred during the process of translation. This is an invitation to listen to Ehuana, even when you don't understand her language, to listen beyond the words and feel the essence of her story. Here is Ehuana.
Vai para livro, papel aqui, tá titeui, tá coana, caminha pirra homo prarana e ai pata tepan huaha, ai yamak inha huaha, moko tebo, ai tebinha huang, tebonhamun, na teb kuanga, caminha kumana.
Ehuana Yaira Yanomami has been the first to do many things in her community. She was the first teacher in her village after she learned and became literate in her mother tongue. She was also one of the first Yanomami artists to draw on paper and represent scenes from the daily life of the Yanomami community. And she also wrote the first book written by a Yanomami woman in her own language, an effort not only to keep a record of the feminine universe, which is in constant change, but also to strengthen the circulation of writing in the Yanomami language among the Yanomami villages. She's showing the book she wrote and illustrated, called Written Words on Menstruation. In the book, she tells the traditions that Yanomami women follow during their menstruation, specifically the introductory rites into maturity and a new body.
Oh, yamak inha huada. Wamak ishwani rayu. Yamak wane de kum, yamakar rayu.
Ehuana wrote this book because she wanted to know more about the sacred knowledge kept by the elders. It is the result of a conversation between Ehuana and Luana, an elder of the Yanomami community, written with the help of her friend Ana Maria Machado. She writes specifically about one tradition, the ritual of seclusion practiced during a girl's first menstruation. But other themes such as marriage, sex, childbirth, ritual, contact with white people are all talked about. Ehuana explains that this ritual must be kept. If not, chaos happens, the earth floods, and we all drown.
Yapi kumayang, yata yai hilibrag bihio mayang, pata patawi, yawanima. Awe, a história, yat peshima, tuupa hapa odaha, unata biyai hikono kuomasa, unata titio hewa omasa, yapi hakuruna, yawanima, kuerwe iparivu yasuk tablalema, yasuk takuber yamia, Ana Maria, ya warpairi prama.
Traditionally, when a girl had her first period, she would be secluded in a house with her mother. The girl would spend days inside, naked, with her arms crossed and eating very little food. Girls need to follow these rules because if not, it's believed that it can affect the cycles of the weather, the cycle from which life itself is conceived. She makes it clear in an image. A 2-dimensional scene on a white background, densely colored with thick strokes. One of the images shows a woman with light brown skin, almond eyes, and dark hair, squatting on the earth with a small pink baby underneath her. A woman, sitting on a tree trunk, holds her back and arm. They are surrounded by trees, colored brown and green. It's a portrayal of birth. Ehuana points at the picture and says, "The mother is helping the daughter." The book is full of these drawings, Scenes of women helping women, of mothers and daughters. Together, under the same roof of one house. Together, taking care of each other, protecting their natural cycles and thus protecting the cycles of the weather and the earth too. Because in Yanomami culture, women are the main guardians of the culture, language, and traditions of a people who live in the forest. Thus, they ensure the balance of the forest and the world. The people of the other side of the river. This is what some indigenous peoples call those of us who live in cities, disconnected from nature, consuming, discarding, extracting. We have spent too many years with our backs to the river, and now is the time to change that. Indigenous peoples in different parts of the world know how to coexist with nature, protect planet Earth, and guarantee human and non-human life. In this podcast series, you will learn from multiple indigenous leaders who live on the front lines of the global climate crisis. Here, they share their life experiences, knowledge, and urgent advice. They are the ones who are leading the path to a possible future. It's time to listen to them. It's time to cross the river. Crossing the River is a podcast from More Than Human Life Project Moth, based at the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice at NYU School of Law, and 070 Podcast.
Nawe, kami awe ai na popuna, wale nakahete ya awe mama.
Ehuana's face is framed by a fringe of brown hair, and she wears the traditional makeup of her people. Red lines made of ukurum paste on her cheeks, and 2 sticks poking out of the sides of her lips. We're in a small room lined with blue walls in a building of the New York University School of Law. Ehuana sits in the corner facing Ana Maria Machado, her friend, anthropologist, and Yanomam translator. Ehuana says she's here because the white people invited her, and she agreed to be here because she wants to talk to those who live far away from the Amazon rainforest, to talk about what is happening in her territory.
Yahu koi mama, yapal koi mama. Te ulihi kami Yanomami mak ulihi petotihi tau kunaha yahuimi. Napu wamaken wamarek ulihi waniang mau kunaha huya waroimi.
If everything was fine in the Yanomami indigenous land, I wouldn't need to be here, she says. If the outsiders hadn't destroyed her land, she wouldn't need to be here. But she accepted the invitation because she knows how urgent it is to bring awareness about what is happening in her territory and her community.
The numbers are staggering. 570 children have died during the past 4 years. Both old and young Yanomami have been dying in their villages from hunger and disease, despite living on protected land the size of Portugal in the heart of the Amazon rainforest.
Absolute devastation on the Yanomami. They're poisoning the rivers with mercury. They use the mercury to separate the gold, which they're mining.
Poisoned the water with mercury, triggering a food and health emergency that's killed hundreds of Yanomami, especially children, from diseases and malnutrition.
The illegal miners have been accused by the Yanomami leaders of physically abusing women, as well as polluting the rivers with the mercury they use to separate the gold from the sediments.
Ehuana was born in Demini, one of the 370 villages of Yanomami indigenous land, the biggest area of indigenous territory recognized by the state of Brazil, the size of Portugal. She's 40 years old, and before becoming a researcher, an artist, and a leader, she was first a mother.
15 anos ia compraram e pai lá comprariam. A compraram e perdia ia acabou da e passou Davi. A luta mama.
Ehuana had her first of 4 children at the age of 15, and she remembers that at the time her uncle, Davi Kopenawa, was fighting and leading the resistance of the Yanomami peoples. Davi, the Yanomami leader and shaman, who's known for achieving the first demarcation of Yanomami land in 1992 and his tireless leadership.
A luta mo Wam, dah ya tani miau, ipai hirua oshiaka ikena, tawa dah ya pi homo prarioma. Awe, ai jisna be, ai Yanomaya maku, what hai kiara maya, hoe ha na tania kubru, hoe ha na yamakria ihuru taman ohotahe.
Ehuana recalls how Davi Kopenawa would talk about this fight. Back then, she was focused on taking care of her son. But one day, Davi Kopenawa explained what was happening. Davi, most likely, was doing a public speech, a harangue, where people with authority in the community speak on nights of collective gathering. Ehuana remembers he said, "Other indigenous peoples have been exterminated, and that will happen here. They want to hurt our children to cause us suffering." And Ehuana says that with those words, her mind opened up.
Away, we hapau the one tapurutamoma. You too want tapuria or show the arutamuti, my bashoa rutamoma maki. Ah, demarcação tablare mamaki e the tapkian shwam. Come tapkian shwam caniperu, kiprano shwam, I told him tapki brano shwam.
Ehuana realized that the men of her community have been fighting for a long time, ever since she was a child. Her father-in-law fought, the demarcation of the Yanomami land was done, and even then, when the land was supposed to be protected, the miners never left. The miners continued with their destruction in other parts of the Amazon.
Ya tare mamori kani perua ya no hotam ya oshoda ya pamana ma hu ya oshmahioda kani berboha huimana awata bata thep waithil rehun kilia ya huyamuha ya no hotam ya pia kuruna ya lutamu bihio ya thwapa bihio.
She remembers that when she was young, one time gold miners arrived in her territory and she hid. The village leaders kicked them out, but she remembers how scared she felt when she saw those men. Ehuana thought about that moment and about what Davi Kopenawa told her. That was when she knew she also had to join the fight to protect her territory and her peoples.
Vichan ya cuprarana e tuatap touhapaha rejeta a comunidade wa missão cadrimaniha hapa tuatap patamum vichan ya cuprarana ya nakarama ya pairioma ya estudamoma ya hinima hinian.
When she was 20 years old, she participated in the Catrimani mission region. There, she talked to other women, leaders, and studied and understood the problems that were happening in the territory.
Misa Catrimani nakari ya bisharia hura brarana yanoma tu yamakokamoda yamakohibaha sore. Yutu amarotha brutamo mamaki takwashwa.
In that meeting, she realized that men have been fighting and leading for a long time, but that not much had changed. The miners are still around, harming the territory. Ehuana realized how important it is for women to join forces, to become strong together.
Yamak makohiba wano tabasha yamak lutamu da takohiba ha konayo da yamak urhib tiraha toki na yapeku makamene. kami apiku.
Ehuana says, if we join the men in this fight, we could get stronger and the invaders might give up. That's what she thought. And Ehuana isn't alone in this thought. In fact, she's one of the many indigenous women in Brazil who have risen as leaders to defend their territory and their peoples. The land women, seed women, as they call themselves. They're the women who are standing up to demand their rights. Women who believe their territories, life, and bodies are intrinsically connected. The movement has gained strength in the last decade. Through gatherings and manifestations, indigenous women from different parts of Brazil have organized themselves into a cohesive movement. And now, they are sowing the seeds of their effort. They are occupying positions of power and are more visible than ever. For example, today, all the key positions in the federal government and the ministries of indigenous peoples are occupied by female leaders. Occupying the position of minister is Sonia Guajajara, one of the most outspoken indigenous leaders in the region, and by her side acting as Secretary of Indigenous Rights is Juma Shipaya. Juma, who in fact came to New York City with Ehuana and was also a speaker on this podcast. But the struggle continues. Although these are historical achievements for the indigenous women of Brazil, many are still subjected to the violence that stems from the colonization of their territories. Ehuana draws giant women, indigenous women that are taller than trees, bigger than rivers. Women with dark hair and brown skin, almond eyes and closed mouths. They stand motionless, yet always bigger than the men. Men dressed as Westerners, as garimpeiros or illegal miners. And while these women take up space on the paper, the men are shrunken, weakened by the shades of green from the background and the feminine presence that calls in the eye of the viewer. According to an article from Sumauma, the contrast between the dominant, larger-than-life woman and the diminutive men highlights the strength and resilience of the indigenous female spirit. This giant woman in the drawings could be Ehuana. She stands tall, like them, carrying her identity as an armor when she travels to the cities across the river.
Yanomami yamak terbaham yamak terbamoko mahimaki oshe mahimaki dozan kuamaki kari perubana posonari hirup ebana pena terbwabra yarohe.
Illegal mining hasn't just abused the territory, it also occupies the bodies of Yanomami girls. Ehuana says the miners, whom she calls Bolsonaro's sons, abuse the Yanomami daughters. Even if they're only 12 years old, the miners rape them. They eat their vaginas, she says. That makes her angry, she says, and that is why she's here.
Kani berup ahat pulode pe yamak na thep wau yamak thep oshemaki shimuna pemang unat kual di koyano yatha wau hui mamai.
If there are minors near the Yanomami communities, they rape the girls. And even though they are very young, the girls get pregnant, she says. And that is why Ehuana is here. Ehuana knows many of these cases. In fact, for an article published in the news outlet Sumauma, women who were suffering abuses from gold miners traveled to Ehuana's community to tell their stories. She listened to the testimonies of mothers and girls. Young girls who, as soon as they start menstruating, are prostituted in exchange for little food. Young girls who are tricked by miners to approach their settlements to be gang raped. Young girls who contracted venereal diseases, some who got pregnant, some who died from the abuse.
Yanomami yamakna yai ohotamang. Posonarian hoshimi take bahanan Yamakana hotama shwahe. Yamakana tubwa shwahe. Yamakwamati matapwani shwahe. Hutipti shwahe. Unat kuayano. Wamarek paili brawi. Wamarek paili braliwi.
Ehuana says, the gold diggers are making us suffer too much. They keep raping our daughters, they keep spoiling the source of our food, they keep cutting down our trees. That's why we want you to support us. Ehuana's community, Demini, is one of the few where the miners haven't managed to enter. She can still walk around her forest, around the trees she's known her whole life. But she knows that everything is at risk. Her territory, nature, but also her people and her culture. They are close. As a teacher and researcher, Ehuana's making a great effort to preserve their millenary knowledge. Her book on menstruation is a form of resistance, a way to preserve the body territory of Yanomami women.
Hoi kultura ta kuoi, yutuhama ta kuoi. Jasuk oni blabihio, pa hoi tan kili ta hinimun kili kamene. Yasuk tabrari daha, yasuk ramaki daha, yamakoshima maho, ayamak ia, mokotap ia hoyamoi maho, yabikum.
These are the words of our culture, which have been around for a long time, Ehuana says. She wrote this book because she doesn't want this knowledge to be forgotten, and she wants young girls to know what to do when they menstruate, how to follow and maintain the ritual of the first period. Perhaps that way they won't be ashamed of their cycle.
Yabikuma. Oh, patatap ma mahiprario de patatap ma prario de yamak bi hatamoha tunayu. Hei tap pataka heshi tap ma prario de. Porque personalita kua yabikuma. Pone yamake warori de tan mohotia hatunayu napatapahu bi totihi.
Ehuana thinks about this a lot. That is why she wrote the book and why she continues to protect the knowledge of her elders. She asks herself, if the elders are all gone, will we know how to act? Now, under the threat of illegal mining and everything that Bolsonaro did, what will happen when the elders are gone?
Yamaknya tamayu torea ishwadi livre yaknya ta patatap kono yatabihinya tama notiwa wapihi kupa na yapihakun yasik taprari kupa.
The preservation of the culture. This is her resistance, aiming to keep on living the way her elders did, carrying on the traditions for the future generations. This is why she made this book, on a topic so rarely talked about, because she wants girls and women to hold this knowledge close to them, to guide their paths. Her desire is for the new generations to think, that's how the elders did it, let's keep doing it that way.
Na yamatania tama buhu shwawe yamakwani opihimia ai os notia we behwawi behwamui uri toti aha yamaknia puro he lapao shwawi tanwa ayamakluta mo shwao ayamak noti brawi.
Ehuana says, we are fighting so that the coming generations can live in a good forest for a long time. The fight is for the present, but for Ehuana, it's about the future. Her people, the only ones who know how to live in the forest and relate to it without destroying it. They are the ones who know the deep roots of how to keep the balance in the territory, how menstruation relates to the weather, how women coming together can help the fight of the men become stronger. How living together in a communal house is the best way to protect what they care for, their people, their forest, life itself.
Wa huwa yukwa shapil tebeshe pata tebeshe awe Wei na papan, wamare komi shebrari makihi, komi kutari na yamak kapulbiye, Yanomami yamak jayima prariode, pania toti hoimi.
The deep knowledge of the Yanomami is crucial for the life and future of all of us. According to Ehuana, the elders and shamans say white people can wipe everything out, and if the Yanomami are exterminated, it won't be okay. The whites, the people of the other side of the river, will be left suffering. They will be left trembling.
Brasil, terra indígena.
Wamata hili boda kameli hat hoshimi wamane ami hili boda thawao toimi wamane hili ni wamare paili prawi yata beshima kamian.
Ehuana didn't leave her forest and traveled all the way to New York City for nothing. She insists on this. Ehuana says, if you listen to these words for nothing, it will be bad for me. I want you to listen, and I want you to support us.
Yanomami yamak puri abrahamaki Yanomami wamarekeha warwayona kaniperupan wamarekeha warwahana Waite yamakan ohotayang yamakyai nohota mangyaro he yahui mama we.
The Yanomami live very far away, but the whites come to our land, the miners come to us. They're bringing a lot of suffering, Ehuana says. This is why she's here. This is why she speaks and draws and writes and paints. She's here because her people, her forest, depend on it. And we must not forget that no matter how far away it may seem, we are depending on Ehuana too. We, the people of the other side of the river, need the Yanomami, the true guardians of the forest. And thus, Ehuana warns, she didn't come here for no reason. She didn't come here for nothing.
Ya waro ponimi, ya mi waro po itakonimi.
E o ouro que brilha em madame vem do sangue de ventre sofredor de mulheres parentes Yanomami.
Crossing the River is a podcast from More Than Human Life Project Moth, based at the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice at NYU School of Law and 070 Podcast. The production and script were made by me, Goldie Levy. It was edited by Carlos Andrés Vaquero Diaz, who is also the lead researcher of this project, and Natalia Arenas from 070. It was commented by Cesar Rodriguez Garavito from NYU Era. The assistant sound editor is Juan Felipe Rojas. The images of this podcast are made by Nefasta. Ana Maria Machado is an anthropologist who has been working with the Yanomami for over 16 years and who supported us in the interpretation of the conversation with Ehuana. The music is by Cosmo Sheldrake, and the song Garimpo Yanomami is by Clarianas featuring Ehuana. Thank you to Ehuana Yaira for accepting this interview and for sharing your time and lessons with us. And thank you for listening.